Hello, YouTube. This is the Nerdy Tribunal, where a bunch of nerds talk about nerdy stuff. Today, we're going to be discussing the Wonder Woman movie that was just recently released. So, obviously, there will be spoilers. So, please go watch the movie, come back and watch our video, or you can just ruin the entire movie for yourself and continue listening. All right, guys. So, we just went to watch Wonder Woman. Tom, can you give us like a small kind of synopsis about the movie?
Well, brief synopsis of this movie is it's an origin story of Wonder Woman, and it takes place before the events of Batman vs. Superman.
Well, we see Wonder Woman for the very first time in Batman vs. Superman. So this is basically a flashback to kind of give the audience an idea of what happened and how she became Wonder Woman.
All right, so what's everyone's kind of general feels for this? Vic, do you want to start?
Yeah, maybe I'm not too deep into the whole lore of Wonder Woman itself, but I think the movie was very well thought of for majority of the movie. Ending part was a little bit iffy for me. Do you guys agree with me, or?
Yeah, it's kind of like they have this weird DC final act lull that isn't consistent with the movies. The first, I would say 70, 80, maybe 85% of the movie is it has a certain tone, and then it got very cheesy at the end, and it felt kind of rushed the way it ended.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that. I know nothing about Wonder Woman. I just know the name. As a movie itself, my analogy would be you're on a roller coaster, you're going up that roller coaster, and you know that you're going to have that thrilling drop. It is metaphorical, I guess, but not drop as in you will reach the climax, the peak, the summit of the roller coaster, to find out that that's the end of the ride. That's what it feels like. You don't get the thrill of the rest of the movie.
There's no drop.
There's no drop, like, in the awesome way. Like, that thrill you get, like, oh, man, this is going to be great. And then you just get to the top, and it's like, sorry, sir, you got to get off the roller coaster.
Oh,
that's exactly how it felt like.
So it's like your old lady up the stairs, like, way of getting up the stairs because you can't walk up, and then that's the ride.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. You just get to, like, your ride was just on the way up, and that's it. And it just fell short at the end. But leading up to it, I have to say I was bought into it. I was kind of on the edge of my seat, and I really enjoyed a lot of the scenes there. Like, my favorite part probably were the choreographed fighting scenes, especially when she was fighting in the city when they first go to the front lines. I think that was by far some of the better choreography coming out of just a movie in general. And the act could have went completely sideways. What's your guys'?
Well, I think the way it was filmed and the action sequences were very nice until the final fight. Everything else looked very grounded in a superhero movie, but then when it got to that final act, it kind of had this Batman versus Superman kind of thing, and there was a couple times I had to take a break, rub my eyes, and I kind of went, what just happened?
Did you have a facepalm moment? Just like
a couple times.
I think we all did.
Yeah, right?
Big inhale, exhale.
But overall, the beginning of the movie did really well. The whole build up of how she was when she was a child, growing up, kind of talking about how she was technically not born but made, and a little subtle hints of her, I guess her future, as you can say, and then basically her progression from there as a young child to teenager to adult, and then basically getting out of the island and exploring the world itself, which was kind of eye opening for her. But I think they made a very good natural progression with it, which made sense, felt natural, and then basically from there on, the middle part of the movie was great, as you guys mentioned. Great fight scenes, great build up of the character and her powers and what she's capable of, and then basically just drop the ball in the final act. So
You go into this movie and we've all heard that it was the greatest DC movie so far.
What was it, 94 on Rotten Tomatoes or something? 94%?
Yeah, it's in the 90s, but obviously those numbers are a little skewed here and
it's
there.
not the greatest judge of a movie based on Rotten Tomatoes.
Hey, Bible. It's the Bible of movies, okay? For a person that doesn't really know a lot about other movies, I kind of depend on these sites, so...
All right.
Bible.
And I think that's part of the problem if people are kind of looking at this. And I think part of the reason why people are giving it such rave reviews is because it's a female-led superhero movie, which there are not many. And
I think this might have been literally the first one since the start of all the recent, the more recent superhero movies.
Well,
Like, we have older movies like Catwoman and whatnot, but that's the past era. And this new era of superhero movies, this would literally be the
this is
first
like
one, right?
this is a superhero craze, and this is the first female-led.
first major female-led. Because
Major,
once again,
yes.
there has been movies in the past with maybe not a top-tier female character. Like you said, like Catwoman, and like there's been other ones in
Like Elektra.
yeah.
Marvel.
So basically, they're like second and third tier characters if you look at the whole comic side of things. But this is such a major one because it is a top tier female character from one of the two major comic book companies, as well is also directed by a female director.
Yeah, and speaking about the whole female thing, like I can see that having Wonder Woman is very empowering for girls and women, and the movie has Steve Trevor, who is essentially Wonder Woman's boyfriend.
So this is Chris Pine, right?
Chris Pine.
Okay.
It felt like Steve Trevor's movie with Wonder Woman in it, because he basically progressed the story, and she was kind of, it felt like she was more of a side character to me, even though she's the title character.
I do agree that this movie has a very Captain America First Avenger feel.
Yeah, the whole war thing,
The
and it's
whole
just
World War thing, and also about him trying to understand his own power. It kind
And
of
the world
mixed with
itself,
that.
right? Because he gets on... Wait, no, that's when...
But that's kind of like a Thor movie while we're looking at it as well. So
that
Fair
is
enough.
that is true. Well, most origins are kind of like that. If you like Iron Man and Batman, fairly similar in a sense. I guess Wonder Woman in this movie is a mishmash of a bunch of them.
Fair enough.
But if you look at this movie, it's set in World War One. It seems like DC kind of went away from the original Wonder Woman story of the setting of being World War II because they want to differentiate from the MCU's Captain America, which was set in World War II.
but that kind of they had to change some of the liberties with some of the characters then, correct?
Yeah, because if you look at one of the characters or one of the villains in Wonder Woman, it's Dr. Poison. In the golden age of Wonder Woman, the comics, in the original, Dr. Poison was Princess Maru, who is a Japanese princess. But in this movie, she is obviously not. You know, if you know your history, World War II is where the Japanese were in alliance with the Germans or the Nazis. But since it's set in World War One, they kind of had to change it up. And we were never really told if she was German. But
we actually don't know her origins, really. Just that this is
yeah,
Dr. Maru, a genius chemist, making the new form of mustard gas. That's literally all she was introduced as, and with this kind of half mask.
Well, we can tell that she's clearly not Japanese. So
Yeah,
from
fair enough,
who's
fair enough.
playing her, right? So
well, in the New 52 comics, it's one of the recent comics for DC. She is the daughter of Russian scientists. So if we're assuming she could be Russian in this iteration of Dr. Poison, but regardless, she's not Princess Maru of Japanese descent.
Because that wouldn't make sense in the context of this story.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
the liberties they take in this is is fine. Like
I
no
think
no
it's
one
very
should have a
just,
problem
yeah.
with this. It's not a major character anyways.
Speaking of liberties taken, how close is this movie, or like how close is her origin story to her actual origin story?
Well, you look at recent comic book movies and origins, it's these studios have been kind of mixing different comic series and putting the best of each comic book into their origins. So in this one, it wasn't directly said that Ares is her brother, but in here it seems like Zeus is her father. So which kind of maybe makes Wonder Woman or Diana the half sister of Ares.
But Zeus as her father is not exactly a technical kind of sense, because it's not like he was a biological father that gave birth to her, right? We all had that kind of iffy part about the final third of the movie. So what are your thoughts on the main villain, Ares?
So, like, with Ares, just the way they kind of... The origin story itself, as told in the movie, is Zeus created man, and Ares is one of his sons, which brought evil upon man. Or, sorry, not evil. Greed and...
Corruption,
thank you. Greed and corruption to man, and then men start fighting, and therefore he's the god of war. And then they go through this big epic battle. Zeus dies in this process. He somehow survives a fight with his father. It felt a little bit forced that Ares is the main bad guy, but in the context of things, it does make sense. It just felt, for me, as someone that doesn't really know anything about Wonder Woman, it just felt a bit of a forced issue here for the movie itself, or even the storyline.
I kind of like how they revealed him, like the twist, but just to see him in his battle with Wonder Woman, it was, you see him as a god, but at the same time, he doesn't seem portrayed as a god. They could have done a much better job. I think they could have done a lot better with the casting, maybe, to kind of give a more menacing, more powerful villain, instead of someone that looks maybe a little more frail with just armor on him. But that's kind of my take on it, and I think they could have done a better job with the casting.
I would have been fine with, like, having Ares as the main villain makes sense in the context of this origin story, because it has to do with Diana's upbringing and her family and her world,
the mythos of Greek mythology.
So it
right?
makes sense to have Ares, but the problem is with the tone of the first 2/3 or 3/4 of the movie, it was very different compared to when Ares was finally revealed, and it felt it was a very different movie after that, and it didn't really sit well with most of us.
I just personally felt that Ares' fight was so rushed, like the whole entire scene. I understand that he showed up almost during the last part, right? But trying to unfeel himself, letting Diana know who he actually was and what his plot was. But again, like Victor mentioned, there is no sort of god sort of power that you can see that can reflect to the sort of the battle, and I think that kind of felt, there's something missing. It's just like Doomsday and
Batman versus Superman.
Superman 2.0.
So, like, it's funny how you guys say that, because it's like, if I didn't know any better, like if you didn't use the name Ares, so when he was first introduced, he kind of floats around throwing metal objects and things, lifting the ground up. Like, it looked like he just had telekinesis, and literally that's it. And then when he donned on the makeshift armor, which I thought that actually was pretty cool, because like, gets all the metal scraps, and then he like pulls something over, uses his fingers to draw the lines into his helmet. I thought that was kind of cool looking visually. And at that point, okay, like he went from a guy that seemed pretty powerful. Okay, now he's a god because they obviously tried to make him physically look like kind of really cool with the fire and the armor. But as you guys, as Tom mentioned, is just when they made that shift to okay, now it's a god versus god fight, and even Ernest said they rushed it. Like they went from fighting with like you can almost say literal sticks and stones by throwing junk at each other, to like wielding crazy forces and lightning, and it's just on a flick of a dime. There was no. You would think that if a god fought instantly, like you're not just like you can say you're toying with them, right? And he doesn't really want to kill him, but it really looked like he just had like some sort of superhero power, and he was just some mortal that can levitate and telekinesis stuff, right?
Well, to me, the final fight also brought up a major problem I have with DC in general. It's the fact that all their main heroes are way too overpowered. So you can see basically the transformation of Wonder Woman from basic beginners in fighting to suddenly way overpowered. Like to the point where it's basically she can take a beating from Ares for probably the entire day and not have a total scratch on her. And out of nowhere, she pulls out all these abilities that she never knew she had, and basically just at a flick of a wrist, like, okay, you just beat the final boss.
It's kind of like it went 0 to 100, like just like that, right? Like I have the exact same feel. You start off like, okay, this is a fight, and now it's gone like spewing lasers and force fields and everything, right?
But the thing about these DC movies are, and it started with Man of Steel, then BVS, and even Suicide Squad. To a certain point, all the heroes just seem to get more powerful as the movie goes on. You look at any other comic book movie, or the heroes, they seem like they could be beat. But in these DC movies, in the DCEU, it seems like they just get more powerful and they're not able to be beaten. There's no power scale, and it makes no sense.
There's like a whole Dragon Ball Z kind of thing going on here, right? Basically, you'll face someone that's powerful, you become even more powerful, and what's the next big thing they have to do? Bring another villain that's even more powerful, but then it's basically just gonna keep on repeating the same thing again and again, and it's just gonna be everlasting because there's no limit to powers from the looks of it, right?
Yeah, you can actually technically summarize this movie as girl learns about atrocities of mankind, goes Super Saiyan, kills God. That's it. I've summarized the entire movie for you. You don't have to go watch it anymore, man.
Tune in next time on Dragon Ball Z, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this movie, definitely, again, just want to touch back on what we talked about in the beginning. 100%, I thought the beginning was really good. The build-up was great, to the point where when she confronts Ares, that's when it sort of went downhill for me. And again, the downhill is just not like sort of rolling down a hill. It's more like dropping down a cliff. So
goes from 100 to 0, right?
It's like when you're watching, I think the battle in Themyscira, the first battle when she's when Diana's going out of the trench, and then there's another one when she jumps into a building and starts like beating up these Germans, and all these ground level battles. You kind of, the camera work was great. It was directed well. The slow motions and the normal speeds and the speed ups were they worked and flowed so well, and you're like, hey, this is actually great. And when Ares comes, the battle's completely different, and now it looks like Man of Steel, where Zod and Superman are just throwing each other through things now, and it's no longer that grounded feel, and it's which would be fine if that's how the tone of the movie was early on, but it just completely changed, like 180 degrees right away.
Well, talking about like the similarities between the final fight in Batman, Man of Steel, where he fought Zod. One thing that kind of caught my attention watching this movie was there seemed to be a lot of issues with the CGI. At times, you can clearly tell that it was not a stunt double. It wasn't her. It was basically a generated image, and they done some pretty good work with the camera to like speed things up or slow things down a little bit to kind of show a little more action. But at the same time, you do notice a difference in the quality of the video, because you can clearly tell that this is computer generated, and it kind of takes away from that moment. So I don't know if you guys felt the same way about that.
Well, I know some scenes were like you can clearly tell some scenes were shot in actual nature, right? Because those scenes were clearly not CGI and it was very beautiful. But to throw in mediocre is a bit mean here, but not smooth CGI, not the most smooth CGI, takes away from a little bit from that cinematography, because I felt like, as Tom said, the movie for the first front 80%, 85% was shot so beautifully and with purpose. Like nothing was really excessive. You can argue that parts of the story might felt a bit excessive. They didn't need these parts, that part. But the way it was shot, everything had some purpose to it. That whether they chose for a close-up or a slow motion or the tempo change, like everything felt very purposeful. And I know we're all harping on the last half, but that's the truth. Like the last half, the tempo that they set up to that point onto the final fight, the last fight just completely throws all the hard work and all they did for the character building, the pacing. It just gets thrown out the window. And that's why we're harping on it so badly right now. Because unless, like, if you've watched it, which I assume you have, like, you might feel a little bit upset or frustrated or, like, kind of even ripped off a little after the movie. And this is why we think, like, we have these kind of negative feelings. Alright, so this brings us to the end of our episode. Thanks, everyone, for listening. If you really like what we do, please subscribe, like, follow us on our social media. If you think we should be discussing certain other topics in more in depth or differently, just let us know in the comments.